Brett Waltemath of Star Watch Media, here with the author of 1968 Into the Abyss, Riley St. James, and also the war veteran behind the story, Tom Wergen. Gentlemen, thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you for having me here.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to start with you, Mr. St. James, and discuss a little bit behind the book and a little bit behind the story of Into the Abyss.
Well, basically, it's a slice of the Viet Nam War during its bloodiest and most intense time, 1968, and the story centers around Thomas Wergen here, and it goes into what he had to go through, and including tunnel rat plus other special operations, and most basically a lot of the feelings behind it, the atmosphere of what it was really like there, and I think that's basically it at this point, and it kind of goes for his term there.
Mr. Wergen, I'd like to ask you, we mentioned tunnel rats, we mentioned other elite units you were a part of. Can you please discuss what, for a lot of us, I think, aren't aware of tunnel warfare or what the tunnel rats did? Can you please discuss the tunnel rats with us as well as the other elite units that you were a part of during your tour there?
Our tunnel rat team was charged with searching the tunnels to gather intelligence information, look for prisoners. That's our primary duty, was to rescue anybody that might be in there of any nation, because that was a NATO war, and then to deny or destroy the tunnel so it couldn't be used again. And most of our help came from the 27th Land Clearing Task Force with their D9 dozers and Rome plows would scrape the jungle bare, which is about the only way you could find these entrances. They were, camouflaged very well in very thick jungle, and unless you fell in one or saw somebody going in or out of one, difficult to find.
And it wasn't only the tunnel rats that you were part of. You were a part of various elite units throughout your tour, correct?
Well, we earned a reputation as being pretty fearless, and we were good demolition folks, and we were asked to join the 5th Special Forces to go on missions. Their primary mission was to go out, of course, and find the enemy, but their secondary mission, like everybody else's, was to go rescue prisoners. And so they wanted to have a trained tunnel rat with their forward teams, their A-teams, in case they found a tunnel. And sometimes we'd get intelligence information, and so they'd call us up, and we'd join them in operations to seek out and try and rescue prisoners. And then on a few occasions we were assigned to the Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, which was a top secret group, and it was classified until 1984.
One unique aspect that I found about this book when I read it was that there's no political undertone of it. It's not a book that takes necessarily a pro-warfare stance or a negative warfare stance. It is simply a book about one soldier doing his duty day in, day out in debatably one of the most dangerous jobs in the history of warfare. Was that something for you, Mr. St. James, that you wanted to make sure to avoid? You didn't want any kind of political undertone. You didn't want to necessarily be pro-war, pro or anti-Vietnam. You just want this to be a story about a soldier's duty in Vietnam?
I think that part was somewhat easy because I have no political undertones for it. I certainly was around at that point, but I didn't get involved in should we be there or shouldn't we be there. I think the most difficult part of the book was making sure that we had Tom's not only his thrilling, he's a modest man. I mean, this man did things that the book depicts that is just incredible. But I want to get his feelings behind that. He was a kid. He was a kid that is running a team. They're asking him to do death-defying missions constantly. And I would really want to get not only his opinions about that, we got in the book, we get a lot of his notes, which helps explain the situation, but I really wanted to get his his feelings and his background, what was going through his mind when he was doing this. But the political part never really played a part, but I would make sure, I mean, of course, there were times when I was writing something about the book, I might have personal feelings, but that's not what the job was. The job was to get the story out on Thomas Wergen, which is fascinating.
Mr. Wergen, Mr. St. James mentioned something I think very key in this book too. You were 20 years old. You were a platoon leader, and as your platoon leader, the men assigned to your unit, they looked to you not only for leadership, but also to keep them alive. What was that like for you then, having that kind of responsibility as a 20-year-old?
It was tough. I mean, that was hard duty. Realizing that any moment, any of us could have been killed. And that's probably one of the reasons why, as we developed the team and we grew larger, that every member of the team had to vote yes on a new member, because you had to depend on that person to cover your back. And it's very difficult to get 8 or 10 guys to agree to bring in a new guy to a unit that was well established, and we trusted each other with our lives.
Did you always feel an obligation that even if you didn't necessarily feel like a leader at a time or feel courageous, that you needed to omit bravery and courage just for the sake of your unit?
Oh yeah, I had to take my turn first in, and take my turn at disarming mines and booby traps, and I couldn't stand back and let the same people be first in, or take the most hazardous jobs. I did my share. We all took turns.
Mr. St. James, another aspect of this book that we had actually discussed earlier was the fact that you didn't feel that it was necessary to make this very graphic in its depiction of the deadly aspect of the war. In other words, there wasn't a lot of blood and gore, that it wasn't necessary to depict the events accurately and really show the dangerous and deadly aspect of not only this war but warfare in general. Just discuss a little bit of that, and if that was always your intention, to not make it graphic.
Yes, it was my intention. I, of course, like everyone else, when we saw the movies from the news channels, all you'd see is, frankly, dead, bloody bodies or some gruesome show. And I wanted to make sure that I could still depict the mayhem and horrendous life that was going on over there for these soldiers. I'm sorry. I think that, well, I learned a long time ago that anticipation and imagination is just as important if you get the right keyword in there. Point being, I felt using words like metal coffin, body bag was just as effective as bloody corpse. It just wasn't necessary. And I've already got comments from readers that they felt that was really good, where they still got the overall impact of what they were going through, but every other page wasn't full of blood and gore. So that was my intention. Thank you.
And kind of a follow-up with that, Mr. Wergen, what were your feelings towards that when you wanted this story depicted into a book? Were you of the same opinion that you didn't feel this needed to be a graphic, that this didn't need to be a book that depicted the events graphically, as well as not necessarily having a political undertone either way about the war?
Yes, the blood and gore was it's part and parcel of war. You only need, like Riley said, the government issued metal coffins say a lot, and when you see them on the news lined up on the runway by the hundreds getting loaded onto aircraft, that's pretty horrible. You know what's in there. Mm-hmm. And even one of the stories that's in there in the book now bothers me. We had quite a discussion over it and rewrote it about 50 times, but I didn't want a lot of blood and gore, and I was not political at that time. I was 20 years old, given a gun, told what to do. Take these guys, go out here, find these tunnels, go on this mission with the special forces, and we did what we had to do.
Approaching it purely from the standpoint of it being your duty, this is what we've got to do.
It was our job.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as being tunnel rats, we all volunteered. You couldn't order anybody down one of those holes, you know, so we were a volunteer force. Unfortunately, the Army took that a step further and volunteered us for some other duties that weren't quite so pleasant, but yeah, we did them.
Was that also kind of, because it was a volunteer group, do you think that also led to just the tight-knit nature of your team? The fact that, well, the guys weren't risking their lives down there because you ordered them to. It was because they chose to be a part of an elite team that had each other's back. Do you think that added to really even more of a closer team than maybe perhaps other units?
Oh yeah, our esprit de corps was, you know, unmatched by any unit there. And, you know, 99% of the soldiers over there didn't want anything to do with us. They didn't understand it, and they didn't want to be part of it. And we all had bounties on our head. You know, they didn't want to be around us, especially in the field. So, you know, I was worth a lot of money over there.
Mr. St. James, you start out, well, you are primarily a fiction author.
Yeah.
Can you please discuss just a little bit about that transition to not only nonfiction, adapting true stories, but also true stories that on a very sensitive topic, not only dealing with a very dangerous and deadly environment, but also just the Vietnam War being as sensitive a topic as it was then and remains today, depicting that in your book?
It was difficult. I'm a fiction author, and I love to write what I make up, you know, based on a central theme, and I can add things or take things away, whatever I want to do. And I think the difficult part of this, well, first of all, when Tom approached me a few years ago about writing his story, I said I'm not interested in anything on war, and he said, well, please let me just tell you a little bit about some of the things. And then when he, you know, I learned about his multiple medals he's won, the Bronze Star and Combat Infantry Badge, plus the missions, not only the tunnel rats. The tunnel rats, you know, are scary in itself, but these missions that he had to go across the border, he hasn't mentioned that yet, but a lot in the book where he had to go, where we weren't, where all the political spin back in Washington was saying where we weren't, they were, and they would have to go over there on special missions, right, and maybe just to tease the enemy, to bring them out in the open so that then somebody behind him could take care of the enemy. So it was just too thrilling to put down, and I couldn't, and I knew it was going to be difficult. And I'll tell you one of the most things that was difficult was because, again, I knew if I was to get this story out, I had to get Tom's feelings. And I knew that for what this man went through over there, this wasn't going to be easy, and he told me that. And I knew I was going to have to be patient and but mainly get that slice of the war out there, plus Tom and his team into the book. So it was kind of a difficult thing, and but then again, on the other hand, it was great because we decided to craft it where we were going to get Tom's feelings in the book. So I would send him an email and say, give me some of your feelings during this time. That really and he just was accurate on that. You know, he didn't waste a lot of words or ramble on and on. He just gave me his feelings, and then maybe I would know what he was trying to tell me and switch it, and that was fun. And a lot of people mentioned that's what they really like about the book.
Mr. Wergen, what was it about Mr. St. James' writing style? Why did you first approach him to take your story instead of another author? What was it about Mr. St. James?
Well, I read one of his books, his first book, and and I liked his style a lot. And I contacted him through his website, and we communicated a little bit difficult at first because he wasn't really interested, you know, in a war novel. And eventually, you know, he came to put my feelings on paper. I'm a good storyteller, he's a good writer, and it worked out very well. I'm very pleased.
And as I stated earlier, we're dealing not only with very sensitive subjects for you personally, but just the Vietnam War being a very sensitive subject. Was there any hesitation for you, not necessarily to put it specifically into Mr. St. James' hands, but just to put it in the hands of any author?
Well, I had to unload some gremlins. You know, I carried them around for a long time, and it was therapeutic for me to finally get this thing done. And there were a lot of sleepless nights when we'd have these 8 and 10 hour sessions of getting some of these stories done that you know, I was awake all night after that. You know, I was so wound up, and the memories were back. You know, it's finally subsided. You know, now that it's done.
Mr. St. James, what was your favorite story from that you include in the book? That what was your favorite?
Well,
that
there's a
that
lot
Tom
of
told you?
anecdotes in there, and I'll tell you, there's a lot of thrilling ones. The one I found most interesting was, and I'll try to shorten up as much as I can, Tom was asked to lead a group of about 200 to 300, Tom and his team were asked to lead about 200 or 300 Chinese mercenaries who couldn't speak English. And what they were going to do was plant a minefield in the Cambodia on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So Tom had to go through a week of intense training, nervous wreck, of course, because they didn't have dummies, that you know, the dummy mines. They had the real thing. So it was critical. They had to teach these Chinese mercenaries how to load them. So they went through that for weeks, all that training. Then, of course, they had to go through the operation of getting into Cambodia on the choppers and marching in there. They get there, and they're feeling good. Tom's running around like crazy, you know, nervous wreck, and Tom and his team, while they're burying these mines. And they're thinking, man, we're going to blow up all of Cambodia and any North Vietnamese that comes within 100 miles of it. You know, and they were all excited, and they got back to camp. And, of course, they get their report, their action report, you know, and of course, Tom's relieved, it's over, and they got the job done. And they found out that about 3 days after, you know, they had like spies in Cambodia, so it would tell them what happened. There was nobody over there to see it. And what had happened was a water buffalo moved in and blew up the mine, which caused the North Vietnamese to figure everything. They were smart, and figured everything out. And so the long and short of it is, where the Army put a lot of money, a lot of men, a lot of arsenal to blow up a water buffalo. We're not always successful, no matter what you see in the movies. And it was just exciting. It's still a part of warfare, what he went through when he trained these mercenaries, and how the mercenaries were over there, and they were bloodthirsty, you know. So it was fun to tell it, and I got a kick out of it, you know, how they screwed up. But we didn't really screw up, but the water buffalo walked in, blew up the mine, so the North Vietnamese. Anyway,
Just
that's
one of those things you can't see coming.
yeah. And these poor guys, you know, were all sitting back at camp thinking, oh, wow, my golly, you know,
Hey, we not only survived the mission and the training, but we got back.
Yeah.
But the water buffalo, we can presume, didn't make
He
it.
didn't.
And so
Purple heart for the water
put
buffalo.
all that into it, and it just blew up a water buffalo. And of course, the North Vietnamese figured it out real quick. Don't move, something's up. And then they found the rest of the mines. So it just goes to show you, it's a part of warfare. You know, we laugh about it now, but the stress that Tom and his team had to go through for that, and we're not always successful, no matter what we see in the movies. We know that.
Mr. Wergen, was there any one story just that you reflected upon when you were thinking of specific things you wanted to be put in the book? Was there any one story that you can recall that you spoke with Mr. St. James about and said, this needs to be included?
The St. Valentine's Day, 1968, and that's as far as I want to carry that.
Mhm.
They can read about it.
Mhm.
It's pretty tough.
What was, for both of you, your reaction as the one whose memories this or what this book is based upon, as well as your standpoint as the author? What were both of your feelings when the book was completed? I'll start with you, Mr. St. James.
Oh wow. Well, of course, I knew we had a good book there, and I was proud of both of us. But I think, again, the most difficult thing that for me was to make sure I got the right. We had to get the story out and tell it like it was, and we had to depict Tom's feelings. And the problem was, he was in Arizona and I'm in California and Nevada, and I had to do this by email. And I knew some of the stuff that we were going through, as he mentioned, was treacherous. But I felt comfortable. Pretty soon we communicated with each other well, and I felt comfortable that when we finished the chapter, he was okay with it, and he was getting rid of some of those ground rules. So I think that was one of the most exciting things for me, just for me. But, you know, of course, having the book completed was another thing that had been a couple, 3 years into the making, so it was a heck of a project. The only other thing I would say, I learned a lot about the Vietnam War, and I was happy that I was able to depict it. I didn't know half as much as I thought I did until I did the story, so I was pleased about that. No political, just what we went through, and you know, and it was unfortunate, you know, that a lot of, you know, what happened. But
And we all can, through reading the book, kind of feel like we're taking the ride along
Yeah.
with Mr. Wergen at that time, and really through Mr. Wergen's words and how you depict them on paper, you really get the feeling of what it's like when you don't know what's inside these tunnels, and you kind of, as Mr. Wergen has stated, you kind of have this acceptance going in that you might not be getting back out again. Mr. Wergen, what's for the audience as well? We'll start with when the book was completed. I know you mentioned earlier that this was very therapeutic process for you. What were your feelings when the book was completed?
Oh, it was a giant sigh of relief. But it also kept me very busy for several months. And all of a sudden, I had time on my hands. And
That email correspondence.
well, it's just not, you know, we were, you know, going through pictures, for example. There's, 80 photos in the book
oh,
that really help, you know, depict the story. I mean, these are official war photos. We had a combat photographer assigned to my group. And so when having Riley integrate the photos with the anecdotes, and then it helps the reader, you know, to believe that, you know, this is true. I mean, you know, here's our base camp. This is where we lived. Here's, you know, a special forces camp out in the middle of nowhere. You know, those are all in the book, and to help the readers get along. And I was telling Riley, I said, well, I need to write another book or something, because I'm getting tired of waxing the car.
Was that difficult for you to, when Mr. St. James required you to go back through these pictures from Vietnam? Was that difficult for you to go back through them and be reflecting?
It was horrible. I mean, I have a box of probably 400 or 500 photos that haven't seen the light of day in 30 years. And I had to go through those, you know, each and every one, and select those that, you know, made sense to the story. And when you look at, you know, just the time spent doing those and the memories it would bring you, you couldn't do that 4 or 5 hours a day. I couldn't. You know, I always got too emotional. I had to put them away.
For both of you, what would you really like the audience to take away from this book? If there's one aspect you can think of, what would you really, for both of you, what would you like the audience to take away from the book and the story? I'll start with you, Mr. St. James.
I think the most important thing, again, I hope, like we all know, there's so much political rhetoric that goes on with these books, but I think if they can read this story and get the feelings of Tom and what they went through over there as kids, I keep saying kids because that's what they were, what they went through, they were doing what they were told. They didn't know any different. You know, they just said, go out and do this. And actually, to be completely frank, it was kill or be killed. That was their mantra. Every day they wake up, kill or be killed on a daily basis. But I think what I would want people to take out of it is, it was horrible towards the end of the war. Of course, Tom was in there during 1968, but the protests started in 1968 too. But the treatment that these soldiers would get when they returned home, like they were, you know, the disdain that would be thrown upon them because you're over there in a war we don't want you to be in. When these kids, and understand that, you know, they wanted to come home. Tom come home with medals, and he's got people, and he's proud that he served his country, and he's got people looking at him like, well, you know, well, there he is, you know, get out of that uniform or something like this. I think that's what I want people to take. Just try to understand what the heck they really went through.
Same question for you, Mr. Wergen. What would you really like the audience to take away from the book and your story? as well.
Well, the timeline, the history, my 15 months over there is very accurate. And that part of the war, where we had over 500,000 troops there in 1968. The Tet Offensive caught everybody by surprise, although it shouldn't have. We mentioned that in the book. But that history is fading. Yeah, people don't know anything about the Korean War these days, and now the history of the Vietnam War, the true history of what it was really like. I haven't read anything or seen anything about Vietnam at all, because it just wasn't in me to do that. But I think it's important that they understand that what's happening, even to the soldiers now. They're 20, 21, 22 years old. They've been in Afghanistan or Iraq 3 or 4 tours of duty. It's difficult. That's tough work. And I think this will help people understand. The war is tough.
Mr. St. James, for those that would like to purchase the book, where can they go?
Oh yes, right now it's on Amazon Select only. It's out there as an ebook, and they put it on their Prime listing. And of course later it's going to be, on the other venues as well. As soon as they get, after they have their first shot at it. And of course we just completed the book, and they put it out there for us. And what we want to do, of course, is get it into print. And we're just taking this nice and slow and doing it, preparing for it. We're going to be looking into the people that want to, put it in print or something. And of course, we act lackadaisical about it, but we'll be excited when that comes along as well. I expect this book, it's already done well. It's really already done well for the reasons we said, not because it's a bloodthirsty book, or anything like that.
Fantastic. And for those that would like more information on 1968 Into the Abyss or other books by you, where can they go?
Yes, I have a website, and it's just RileySt.James.com, and no period after the Saint, of course. www.RileySt.James.com, and it'll go right to my website, and it's all out there. It's got my other books that are published, and all the information about me.
Wonderful. Mr. St. James, Mr. Wergen, thank you so much for the time. 1968 Into the Abyss, an absolutely incredible book. The story needed to be told, and now it can be read by the public. Thank you so much, gentlemen. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.